Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to be showing you how to draw a cone with value. Alright, so kind of like how we did with the sphere, you're going to need your reference image, your actual surface you're going to draw on. Yours is going to be a worksheet. I'm just using a regular piece of paper. Your value scale, pencil, and a scrap piece of paper is always helpful. Okay, so first things first is to draw the actual cone. So if you don't remember the steps to drawing a cone, it looks something like this. Where I'm going to place my cone is also going to take into consideration the fact that I have to add in my cast shadow. So if I need to be able to fit in my whole cast shadow, then I need to position my cone more to the right on my paper. So that's what I'm going to do. So first step is to draw my base oval, followed by the line up the center, which dictates how tall the cone is, which this cone is fairly tall and skinny, so I'm going to make that kind of long. All right, then we connect this line to the side of our base oval, like that. And then we erase our guidelines. Well, you pick your best curves, but honestly, I didn't do that bad of a job. So I'm just gonna pick my favorites out here and then erase my guidelines. Okay. Now, like the sphere, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get this cast shadow in, okay? So if I'm looking at the cone on my iPad, if I were to divide this cone in half vertically, the cast shadow is pretty much going to line up with that section, okay? So I'm going to divide this cone in half vertically, and I'm just going to mark where the cast shadow is going to go, okay? Now over here, if I were to divide this in half horizontally, it's really not going to make much of a difference. Really, if you look at it, that cast shadow starts like just above this area that curves over here, okay? So I'm just gonna mark where I feel like that's gonna go. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my scrap paper, because now we gotta figure out how long the cast shadow needs to be. All right, because some people make them really short, some people make them way too long. We've got to try to make sure that it's proportionate to the actual shape. So I'm going to take my piece of scrap paper and I'm going to measure how tall my cone is. So I'm going to line up the corner of the paper with the top of the cone, and then I'm just going to mark on my paper where the bottom of the cone is. All right, now if I take this measurement and I line it up with that cast shadow begins, so this area right here that we just marked, it almost meets it, okay? It stops like right there, okay? So it's almost the same length as the cone, okay? So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna measure the top of my cone to the bottom of my cone here. And then if you also notice that it doesn't point straight out, like it doesn't come out like completely horizontally like this. It kind of comes out like on an angle. Okay, so I'm gonna try to show that. So let's see, I think I'm gonna do it like right there. So it kind of comes out on an angle. So I'm gonna say this is where we're gonna put the tip of it, and then I'm just gonna connect the dots basically. And connect those lines. It's all together. All right, now I've got my cast shadow in there. And I can erase some guidelines. All right, next up is to get that horizon line in there. So now we can actually divide up our cone, and it's gonna be a bit useful. Okay. So if I were to divide the cone in half horizontally, the horizon line like pretty much meets up with that point. So that's what I'm going to do here. And I can use my fingers to measure that. So that looks about the same. So I'm going to mark there, and then I'm just going to make a horizontal line, and then I can always just erase what goes through my cone. Okay? Now my cone's in an actual setting, which helps contribute to it looking three-dimensional. I'm gonna get rid of that line I had in there. Okay. Now we're gonna map out the core shadows. So the cone ones can be a little weird. So automatically I see this area right here. That's really light. Okay, that's my highlight. But the darkness keeps coming down here, but this is different from this area. And then I also have another little highlight over here. So I'm just gonna, oh, and the top of my cone has a little highlight on there as well. So I'm gonna try to mimic that. So I'm just gonna really lightly sketch that out. Alrighty. So now I've sketched out my core shadows and my highlights. So last time I went the other way where I went from dark to light. I'm gonna go the opposite way. I'm gonna go light to dark. So none of these values would really be white, so I'm just gonna do some really light value over my whole cone. You might like this approach better. However it works for you is however it works for you. All right, so I'm using some really light value. Then I know over here is gonna be a bit darker. I should be using my value scale. All right, so if I look over here, this highlight is kind of like a 2 to a 3, but down here it gets to like a 4, okay? Then over here sort of looks like a 5. So what I'm gonna focus on is getting that 5 area. All right, and then because this area I said was a 4, I'm gonna lighten up the pressure a little bit. And then when I'm shading, especially when I'm trying to like sort of blend or buff, I like to use the side of my pencil. I don't know if I said that in the sphere video. So I'm kind of just going over this a little bit. I can get rid of this really harsh line there. All right. Then I also see this area right here where it gets like really, really dark. So I'm gonna go in and show that. All right, good. So not bad. It's easier for it to appear three-dimensional when it actually like sits in a real space. Okay, so now if I go to the cast shadow, the cast shadow looks like it's gonna be like a 7. So I'm gonna bring this up to a 7. And same thing for my background. It looks like it's also gonna be a 7. Alrighty, looking pretty good. Now, because this floor isn't quite a 1 or a white, I'm just gonna go over for it with some really, really light value. Just again, to like make it look like my cone's in an actual setting so that it looks more three-dimensional. And there you have it. There's my cone image. I could probably bring some of these darks out a little bit more. I can do that real quick. That looks better. Okay. And there you have it. There's my cone. And next up we got the cylinder.